What is it to pray? That is our topic. Yesterday we saw that prayer is coming to God as we are, recognizing our sinfulness. We looked at the parable that Jesus told about the Pharisee and the tax collector. Both of them went to the temple to pray. One stood up and talked about himself, how good he was. He said he fasted twice a week. He gave 10th of all that he had as tithe. And he was not an adulterer, a robber. And so he was recommending himself to God as being a very good man. The tax collector, on the other hand, stood and said, God, have mercy on me, a sinner. And Jesus said, this man, the tax collector, who was detested and disliked and ostracized by the society, went home justified before God. And so we said prayer is coming to God as we are in our sinfulness, recognizing that we are sinful and needing the mercy and grace of God. Today we want to look at another aspect of prayer. We find that portrayed in the life of Zacchaeus. We know all about Zacchaeus. From childhood we have heard the story of Zacchaeus, that he was a short man. And so Jesus was traveling one day through Jericho. It was the custom of Jesus to travel often to Jerusalem from Galilee, where he spent most of his time in ministry. But during the temple festivals, he would come to Jerusalem. And as he was traveling through Samaria, through Jericho, a large crowd came around him. His name had gone before him. He was obviously well known because of his miracles. And so a large crowd gathered around him in Jericho, following him as he was traveling. But there was one man in Jericho by the name of Zacchaeus. He also was a tax collector, like in the parable yesterday. But he was no ordinary tax collector. He was the chief tax collector. But he wanted to see Jesus. He also had heard about Jesus. But there was a large crowd around Jesus, and he was a short man. He could not see Jesus over the shoulders of the crowd. And so he thought of a way out of this. He ran before the crowd, found a tree and climbed the tree. And he hid himself among the leaves, waiting for Jesus to pass by so he could have a glimpse of this Jesus who he had heard about so much. And so Jesus soon passed by that tree. To the consternation of Zacchaeus, to the surprise of Zacchaeus, Jesus stopped under the tree. He looked up into the tree and spoke to Zacchaeus. We read about it in Luke chapter 19, verses 5 to 7. It says, when Jesus reached the spot, he looked up and said to him, Zacchaeus, come down immediately. I must stay at your house today. What a thing! Jesus comes to the tree. He knows Zacchaeus was up in the tree. And so Jesus invites himself to stay in the house of Zacchaeus, a tax collector, one who was not liked by the community. And so Zacchaeus was very happy that this has happened, and so he came down and welcomed. We are told in verse 6, he welcomed Jesus gladly. But of course, the people around Jesus began to murmur and mutter. And they said, Jesus has gone to be the guest of a sinner. But Jesus is willing to be with all, regardless of who they are. He is no respecter of position, power, and people. Whether you are poor, whether you are rich, no matter who you are, He is willing to come and be with us. And so Jesus and the disciples went to the house of Zacchaeus. I'm sure they shared a meal together. And in verse 8, we read Luke chapter 8:19, that Zacchaeus stood up and said to Jesus, "Look, Lord, here and now I give half of my possessions to the poor. And if I have cheated anybody out of anything, I will pay back 4 times the amount." And so what we find here is that Zacchaeus not only came to Jesus as he was, recognizing things were not right in his life, recognizing that he was a sinner, but he also wanted to make reparations for the wrong things that he had done in his life, to right the wrongs in his life, to put things right. And so here he said, "I will give half of all my possessions to the poor." Not only that, anyone that I have cheated in the past, I would give 4 times as is required by the law of Moses. 4 times whatever he had taken from other people unlawfully. So he came to Jesus as he was, but also he decided to put things right. So Jesus said to him, "Today salvation has come to this house." In Isaiah chapter 1 verse 16, it says, "Wash and make yourselves clean. Take your evil deeds out of my sight. Stop doing wrong." You know, in Isaiah chapter 1, Isaiah is talking to the people of Judah because they continue to worship in their temples, doing all the things they are expected to do, offering sacrifices, coming together on the Sabbath days and the festivals. But Jesus said, none of those things are acceptable to me unless you wash and make yourselves clean. Take your evil deeds out of my sight and stop doing wrong. And that is what Zacchaeus did here. He came to Jesus and he was willing to put things right by the grace of God in his own life. In Revelation chapter 3 and verse 20, towards the end of his messages to the 7 churches, Jesus says, "Here I am. I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come in and eat with that person and they with me." And so Jesus now is inviting himself into our lives, into our homes. Like Zacchaeus, if we are willing to open the door and gladly accept him into our lives, then he is willing to come and help us to put things right. So, what is prayer? Prayer is coming to God as we are, in our sinfulness, recognizing our sinfulness. Prayer is putting things right in our lives, examining our own lives and see where we are doing things that are wrong and putting things right. Righting the wrongs we have done in our lives. May God bless us.